shot to the head, like.
Well, there was no head left.
Like an actual piece, like a solid piece of shot to get right between the eyes.
Wow.
Yeah, there wasn't much head left.
No. You ever seen the movie Glory?
What, isn't that what, the 54?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But there's a scene where his head gets taken off.
Yeah, they took a picture of Rosecrans 8 at Stone River. He took a cannon shot like right there, and yeah.
Nasty.
From like here up, there was nothing left.
Yeah, well. All right. On that happy note, yesterday we talked about some things that impacted Georgia agriculture. I said there were 5. What were they?
Cotton price.
What?
Price of cotton?
No, not really.
Farm equipment.
Said the cost of farm equipment, the boll weevil, migration of farmers, drought, and said that. What did we leave out? Or no, there were 4. I'm sorry. You were right. There were 4. Thinking about today. So all of those things can contribute to the fact that Georgia is in the middle of a depression before the Great Depression ever starts. And, I talked about my dad yesterday, not even knowing they were living in a depression because things had already been so bad. But things get worse. There's economic disaster on a national scale and really on an international scale. The depression does not just affect the United States. It affects nearly every country in the world. Part of that has to do with World War I. Part of that has to do with what happens to the United States. But this depression it's viewed initially as simply an economic turndown, and 11 years later, it's still going on. It lasts from basically 1929 to 1940. And I'll say this for the first time today to you. The thing that really ends the Great Depression is World War II. It puts America back to work, finally. Roosevelt's New Deal, which we'll talk about, has some impact on the Great Depression, particularly towards the end of the 1930s. But it's essentially World War II, which begins in 1939, but America's involvement really starts in 1940 when they begin to manufacture material for Great Britain and France. And that gets people put back to work. And then America recovers, and I don't know if this is the correct way to say it, but I'll say it anyway. The United States recovers with a vengeance once 1941, really 1942 rolls around. Yeah, they were angry. Your great grandfathers and grandmothers were angry at what had happened, and they poured everything into defeating the Axis powers. What is the Great Depression? It's actually the longest period of unemployment and low economic activity in modern history. And it's not caused by the stock market crash. Again, that's one of those trigger events, like the assassination of the Archduke. It lights the fuse. The stock market does collapse in 1929. Banks fail, businesses fail, and really we could say that's the start. That was the kickstart to the Great Depression. But again, you look at states like Georgia, and it had already been going on. By 1932, 3 years into the Great Depression, 25% of all Americans are unemployed. That's 3 of you. Okay, you 3 don't have a job. Now, that's pretty bad, isn't it? You know what's worse? You don't have any hope of finding a job because there are none. And the rest of y'all, you got jobs. But you are underemployed. What does that mean, do you think?
benefits. You are
Okay.
working, but you're not getting what you should be.
Okay, so maybe you're just not able to work enough hours in the week because your employer doesn't need you. So instead of working 40 hours a week, which is a normal work week these days, it probably wasn't in 1929, you're working half of that. So what happens to your pay when you work half the time? It's cut in half. And maybe, well, today if that were to happen, if you work 40 hours a week, you're considered a full-time employee, and there are certain things by federal law that your employer has to supply you with. And so you'll find in a lot of cases, people will, particularly if they're working an hourly job, instead of 40 hours, they work 36 hours. That way, they're not considered full-time employees. Okay, they're underemployed just because of that. Basically, it means this: you're employed, but you do not make enough really to sustain you. Now, what's the discussion in the United States today? What did President Biden promise he was going to do? $15 an hour, right? Is that going to solve the problem?
No.
What will solve the problem? Don't know. That was not a trick question. We just don't know. Because you have people who are underemployed. Maybe they work 40 hours a week, but they're not paid what is considered a living wage. And so part of President Biden's platform is to up the minimum wage to $15. How many of your parents own a business? Anybody? Okay. Do they have employees that work for them? What kind of business?
He's an electrical contractor.
Okay.
So it's like the lights outside of Walmart's and airport runway lighting.
Okay. Hey, that sounds like fun. Do you have people that work for him?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And let's just suppose that he plays, Owen wants a job. He goes to your dad and his dad, yeah, Owen, you're a nice guy. You can carry my tools for me. You can be my gopher. Go for that. Go for this. You know what a gopher is, right? Go get the board stretcher. Y'all didn't get that, did you? No. There is no board stretcher. How do you stretch a board? You don't. Okay. And he's going to pay him $10 an hour. Okay? That's pretty good, isn't it, Owen? I mean, particularly, you're still in school, you're living at home, eating your mama's groceries, living off her electricity, that kind of thing, right? So that's pretty good. $10. He can, and he's working 40 hours. That's $400 a week, right? Minus taxes. Federal law comes out and says $15 an hour. So Anna's dad has two choices, right? He can pay Owen $15 a week, which is now going to be how much?
$46,000.
Well, a week. So it'd be, 40 hours times 15? It's what, $600? Is that right? Yeah. Okay. It's pretty good. But guess what happened? Along with this increase in wages, the price of gasoline went up. The price of Chick-fil-A went up. The price of bread went up. The price of milk went up. Meat, eggs, cheese. Your light bill went up. Why? Somebody got to pay for this $15 an hour, right? Or the other option is, Owen, you're doing a great job, but I can't pay you 40 hours a week anymore. I'm going to cut you to 20 hours a week. That's the other option, right? And does that help somebody who's already underemployed? You're working at McDonald's, you're working 40 hours a week, you're making $10 an hour, which at McDonald's, that would be, that puts you in manager position at McDonald's. Store owner comes by and says, federal law, I got to pay you $15 an hour, but you're only going to work 20 hours a week. Does that help any? So I am not optimistic about this right here. I think people will remain underemployed. And that was one of the problems at the start or into the Great Depression. Farm income. A bunch of farmers were all hurting, right? Their income had already been cut, and now we're going to cut it again. And what you see in Georgia and other southern states is you see farmers who had once farmed to make a living, they're now subsistence farming. They're living to eat. And one of the things I want you to understand is that there is no safety net here. You know, if your parents work for a company and that company has to lay them off, what happens? Well, it's a shock, first of all. But secondly, there's a safety net for your parents. There's a safety net for your family. Unemployment. There is no unemployment. There is no unemployment insurance. If you're laid off, that's it. You just don't work. You don't get paid. Comes into the 1930s, late 1930s. So you need to understand that, okay? And I think y'all understand that. I mean, there is no welfare. There are no social programs to help people get back on their feet. You got your family. You got your church. If you live in probably in a smaller community, you have people that you can reach out to. People are going to help you. But the government's not. It's not their job. So let's look at some pictures because I like pictures. What's going on here? It's a donut line. Free coffee and donuts. Right there. For the unemployed. That's a big line. Yeah. Bread and soup, but better. Coffee and donuts. The fuel of America. Coffee and donuts. There you go. What is this? That is a Hooverville. What's a Hooverville?
It's kind of like slum. Yeah, like there's a slum full of shacks.
Yeah, slums built by the unemployed. Why are they called Hoovervilles? Yeah. Can I say this? And some of y'all will get it and some of you won't. Herbert Hoover sucked. Vacuum cleaner joke. Did you get that? That was on film too. So, all right. Yeah, he took a very hands-off approach to everything, particularly the economy. What about these fellas over here? Yeah, they're living in a Hooverville. What are they doing? Yeah, I mean, they're beautiful children. What are they doing? Hoover's Poor Farm Tobacco Fund. What does that mean? You can donate cigarettes or donate money so my daddy can buy cigarettes? What is it? I don't know. Hard times are still hoovering over us. Chuckle, chuckle. What about the little fella in the middle? Right here. Why can't you give my dad a job? He is protesting. Why? What is his question? What's the answer to his question? Real simple. There aren't any. There are no jobs. And what about this? Those are newspapers, yes. I think it's kind of like a pavilion or something. And people have just gathered there to sleep. It is. That's kind of what it looks like. There's a big gazebo. Again, there are no homeless shelters. There is no safety net for people. And so people do the best they can. We kind of chuckle about that picture that's behind here. And I went back and looked at the original picture. It says 4 children for sale. Inquire within. Why was that woman selling her children? Because she couldn't care for them. She couldn't provide for them. Where was her husband? Don't know. He may have gone off somewhere looking for a job and never came back. We don't know. But desperate people do what? Desperate things. And people were desperate. Incredibly desperate. Now, this next picture, I think, is one of my favorite pictures that comes out of this era. You ready? It's almost as good as that one back there from the Civil War.
Pretty ironic.
Incredibly ironic. You've got these folks right here that are standing in what? Probably bread line, soup line, coffee and donuts, whatever. But they're obviously gathered to get something that they need, and they're standing in front of
The luxury.
Yeah, the world's highest standard of living.
It's not even true now.
No, it was true. It was true for a time, and it was true before the Depression, and it might have been true during the Depression, which tells you how bad it was in other places. But there's no way like the American way, and then you have folks standing in line to get something to eat. What else is ironic about that picture?
Nothing but white people in the picture.
Yep. The daddy's white, the daughter's white, the mama's white, the child's white, the dog's white. Everybody white.
The car's probably painted.
It's probably painted white. You're right. And then you have black folks standing in line. And look at the people that are in line. Do they? What do you think about those folks?
I look for.
Well, everybody was.
Before the 1920s.
Yeah. I look at them and I see. Let me see if I can put a phrase together. Humbled pride. Does that make sense? Now, none of y'all are parents. Hopefully you will be one day. And you'll be telling your children about me. Probably not. But you might. But as a parent, I can tell you that there's no worse feeling in the world than not being able to provide for your children. Not being able to, guys, I'm going to be sexist for a minute. You'll just have to get over it, girls. Okay? We can fight after class. That's fine. There's no worse feeling than not being able to protect your wife. Being able to provide for her needs. And I look at some of these guys in this picture, and it's like this guy right here. It's like, I'm a failure. I failed my children. I failed my wife. I'm just a failure.
Yeah, like
Can't find a job.
being at the mercy of other people or certain corporations has got to make you feel a pretty negative way about yourself and what you've done to save your family and people that because you're at the mercy of the generosity of somebody else.
Yeah. And what we see in the Depression, okay, we see men who are willing to do whatever they have to do to provide for their family. And sometimes it's maybe like, the husband that's not in this picture. And I don't know, I'm totally speculating. They went off to try to find jobs. They went off to find work, and they couldn't find it. So they just didn't come back. Rather than having to come home and tell their wife, I failed again, they just didn't come back. How many of y'all have grandparents that live in town? Or close? Okay. During the Great Depression, who's got the bigger house, you or your grandparents? Or are they about the same size? Okay. Well, what might happen in order to save money is your grandparents move in with you. I mean, if you got aunts and uncles that live close by, they're going to move in with you too. So now, Jade, instead of having that palatial bedroom you have, you're still going to have that same bedroom, but they're going to be 8 people sharing it with you. Some of them you don't even like, right? Because you got that cousin that you just... Ugh. That's what people did. Because, again, there is no safety net. And families pretty much live in the same place their entire lives. I mean, you don't have people like my children. You know, it's just me and Karen and the dog, and he's on his last leg. You know, I've got a son that lives in Virginia, one that lives in Watkinsville, one that lives in Carrollton. You know, they're scattered. People didn't do that in the 1920s. You were born and lived and died in the same place. Yeah.
That still goes on with my dad's grandpa's side of the family. Like my great grandpa's still living, and every year we have like a family reunion in Soperton, Georgia, and everybody still lives right there in Soperton.
Yeah. Well, my son's wife, Mary, her entire family lives within 2 miles of her in Watkinsville. But that's unusual. Yeah.
Yeah, so right next to my house, there's a super old house that my great-grandparents lived in. I think my grandparents or my mom's parents were raised there or my mom's mom was raised there for a couple years. But it's not that big of a house. But at one point in time, there was like 16 people living in there. And like I walked through there, and they didn't have electricity, indoor plumbing, water, running hot.
Yeah, particularly in rural areas like Wilkinson County, that was the normal house.
Now my grandparents live about a 45-second drive from that house.
Yeah.
So they haven't gone very far.
Haven't gone very far. Okay. So that's, just wanted you to see that. Now, there are 5 factors. That's where the 5 came from earlier. 5 factors that contributed to the Great Depression. The first one is what we call the unemployment cycle. Now, how does that work? Well, you're going to have to draw this, by the way. I gave you enough room to draw it, so you have a good understanding of it. So let's just start right here in the middle, okay? Industries, businesses create more product than they can sell. In other words, people either don't need it or they can't buy it. So, and let's just suppose that we are we're manufacturing widgets. Don't ask what a widget is, but every accounting class I ever took, that's what somebody was manufacturing. So you're manufacturing widgets, okay? And you build widgets and build widgets and build widgets, but it's a luxury item. People don't have to have it. And there's a little economic downturn and people stop buying widgets. Well, you're still making widgets. You're still paying people to run your machines and make your widgets. You reach a point where your inventory is at capacity. You can't store any more widgets. And so what do? Do you keep making widgets? No, you stop making widgets. So what happens to your employees? You either lay them off or you cut their wages. So let's just say Marley is working at the International Widget Factory. She's a master of the widget. Okay? And that happens. There's a downturn. Widgets stop selling. Or maybe there's another product that comes out that's better than the widget. Who knows? For whatever reason, they can't sell widgets. So she was working 40 hours a week. She was making $20 an hour. Her boss comes to her and say, Marley, you got to choose. I can lay you off and you won't get paid, or I can cut your hours and how much you get paid per hour. So what does Marley do? Remember, there is no unemployment insurance. So what do, Marley? You want to just not work and not get paid, or you want to work a little bit and get paid a little bit? Yeah, because she got 12 children she got to feed. And a worthless husband. Okay, so what does she do? She takes lower pay. So now instead of making $20 an hour, she's making $15 an hour, and she's only working 20 hours a week. Her pay's been cut pretty significantly, right? So what happens? What can she spend money on? Really the things that are necessary. her spending power has been cut, right? So what does that do? She doesn't go to Chris Ingram's store and buy luxury items anymore. She goes to Chris's store and buys only the things that she needs. She's still got to pay her light bill. Maybe she's paying rent. Maybe she's got a mortgage. Maybe she's got a car payment. Those are things she has to take care of. So what happens? Well, what happened to the inventory? Did it go down any? Nope. So what do we got to do? Marley, hate to tell you, we're going to have to cut your pay again. You're now only going to make $10 an hour. So what happens? Less spending power. Can't buy things. Inventory's still there. What happens? Now, honey, we got to let you go. That's that unemployment cycle. We're not even able to pay you $5 an hour. You know, you can come work if you want to, but we can't pay you. That's a deal, isn't it? Now, that happens to one person, that's bad enough, right? Because that person is a human being. But when the whole country, or a majority of the country, is in that situation, remember, by 1932, 25% of the country is unemployed. And probably the majority of the country is underemployed. This is vicious. And you got people that want to work, but they can't. Poverty is one of those things we look at and we go, gee, I wish that'd go away. Or why don't those people go find a job?
It's so hard to get out of it.
It is a terrible cycle. I've got a friend named Bob Lupton that is a psychologist, and he had an office in Stone Mountain. You know, very fluent, lived in a nice house, drove nice cars. But he started working with the people that lived in the Grant Park area of Atlanta. That's where old Atlanta Fulton County Stadium used to be. And back in the 70s and 80s, you did not want to go there alone or at night. It was the most crime-infested, drug-ridden part of Atlanta. And he and his wife bought a house in Grant Park, white as the driven snow. Moved into an all-black community because they felt like if they were going to make a difference in people's lives, they had to live with them. And they did. They made a difference. But I remember Bob, we were eating lunch one day, and he started talking about the poverty cycle. And he said, people that live in poverty never get out of it. It is almost impossible to get out of it unless they totally break from everything they've ever known. And he said, we have kids that go off to college, get educated, and they come back and they get stuck in that poverty because they won't break away from what's keeping them in poverty. You know, it's terrible. Now, I can't think of many things that are worse than living in poverty. And I've seen some poverty. I mean, I used to go to school with a guy named Larry Simmons. We played football together. And Larry lived, where did Larry live? He lived north of Georgia College. I think there's an apartment building where his house was. And I can remember me and my daddy, he played rec football. We played rec football together. And me and my daddy would take him home after practice. And I remember walking to the front door with him one day, and there were literally holes in the floor of his house. And it didn't have indoor plumbing. And this is 1975. So not that long ago. You know, and his single mom and his mom worked hard. But she was never going to make enough to bring them out of poverty. Larry died as a teenager, by the way. Sad story. Let me pause for a moment. Really sad story. He's a good ball player, good guy, good kid. Would have been a good man. Anyway, so the unemployment cycle, and then you have workers being paid low wages, underemployment, right? And so they buy on credit. Does that happen today? You betcha. And it happens to people that make six figures. They spend more than they make. And we talk about cycles. This is a vicious cycle, the debt cycle. You get into it, and it's not impossible, but it is hard to get. I mean, you do things like take out credit cards so that you can use that credit card to pay for the credit card that's due next week.
That's like taking a loan to pay off that long.
Yeah. It's just, and you never get out of it because interest rates are 29% on credit cards in some cases. So they're buying on credit and they can't repay it. Now, what does that do? Okay, Chris's store, right? Little grocery store, mom and pop kind of thing. Chris is married. He's got 9 children. Marley's got 12. Well, Marley's been shopping with Chris for years, and they know each other. Their families know each other. They like each other. She won't buy groceries anywhere else, and he's always willing to help. But what happened to Marley happened. Okay, Chris lets her buy groceries on credit with the promise that she'll do what? Pay him back at the end of the month. Okay? End of the month comes, and there was more month than money, right? And so she goes, Chris, I can't pay you. She's ashamed. Her pride has taken a blow. And Chris is a good guy. He says, look, I understand. It's okay. You pay me when you can. Okay? And Marley, she's grateful. She keeps, buying from Chris on credit, but she's very careful. She's frugal. She doesn't buy, kids don't get ice cream anymore. They get bologna and cheese and white bread, maybe some mustard and water, because they're just trying to survive. End of the month comes, guess what? She still can't pay him back. And so that goes on for 6 months. And finally, Chris has got, how many children did I say? 9? You got a wife, you got a mortgage, you got a car payment, you got to buy supplies for your store, right? So finally she says, Marley, I can't do it anymore. I got to cut you off. He still hadn't gotten paid, right? And he's now behind on, because he doesn't do it just for Marley. Chris is a good guy. He does it for anybody that needs it.
So now they can't shop and he's not getting paid.
He doesn't have anything for them to buy because he can't buy inventory. Right? And so what happens to Chris? He's gone out of business. Okay? He's bankrupt. And, that happened over and over and over in a lot of places. Businesses fail because they couldn't pay their bills. They couldn't buy inventory. They couldn't stay in business. And a lot of it had to do with credit. Then number 3 is really about World War I. The U.S. loaned money to countries like Germany and France, Austria-Hungary, those European countries that were really affected by World War I. But then they don't give them the opportunity to pay it back. They create an environment where they can't pay back the money. New Zealand All Blacks haka, for those of you who were wondering. And so Europeans can't sell their goods in America, so they're not making as much money, and so they can't pay back the U.S. loans. Exactly. And so the depression deepens, it worsens because what happens in one country affects another country. Yeah.
I saw this really good analogy for it. It was like, so a country's car breaks down, and let's say Britain's like, sure. So he hitches up to him, and then Britain drives off a cliff, and they both die.
Yeah.
That's kind of he tried to help him out, but he hitches him, and the car just runs right off the back.
Yep.
And they both die.
And that's what happened here, And I think what you see after the Civil War, we talked about Reconstruction, and what was the United States government trying to do? They were trying to rebuild the infrastructure of their enemy, right? Okay, or their former enemy, and that becomes kind of a model for the United States after every major war that we're involved in. We spend millions, if not billions of dollars helping to rebuild countries. And after World War II, we're spending money in Europe, Germany. We're helping Germany rebuild. We're helping Japan rebuild. Yeah. We occupied Japan for a while, but anyway. So that's number 3. Number 4, people over-speculated on stocks. What does this do? Well, they're using borrowed money to buy stocks. That's like going to Las Vegas. That's like going to your bank, borrowing $100,000 and going to Las Vegas. You got no guarantee. So, what happens? Let me draw my little graph. Some of y'all probably saw that earlier, but let me redraw my graph. Who wants to be picked on? Okay, Marley. I've been picking on you all day. Might as well pick on you some more. Okay. 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, 90, 100. All right. Marley. Marley. What am I going to do with you? Marley decides she wants to buy stock. She's going to invest in the Gargoyle or the International Gargoyle Company. Okay? They make gargoyles. People want gargoyles. They scare away evil spirits. People want gargoyles. So Marley borrows $10,000. That's a lot of dollars, right? From the bank. Banker Caden. Wasn't the smartest loan he ever made, but it okay. She buys 1,000 shares at $10 a piece. How much is that? That's $10,000. Okay? All right. She owes the bank what? $10,000 plus interest. Okay? So $10,000 plus. All right. So let's see what happens. You ready? She buys it what? $10 a share on January 1st. By quarter 1, at the end of quarter 1, it has dropped to $5 a share. She a little nervous?
Oh, yeah.
She a little nervous. But has she lost anything yet? She hadn't sold anything, so she hadn't lost anything. And suddenly, there's an evil spirit scare. People are terrified of evil spirits. And so they rush to their local Walmart and they buy gargoyles. I mean, lots of that gargoyle right there cost $45 in 1998, 99. Okay? So you can imagine, gargoyles are pretty expensive. So, company does real well. By June 1st, a share of stock cost $70. Has Marley made anything yet? No. She's thinking, I'm not going to sell because if it'll go to $70, it'll go to $100. When it gets to $100, I'll sell. Okay? So, it's at $80 on June 1st. By the 1st, it has gone to $90. But what did Marley say? $100. Gets you $100, I'll sell. Well, the president of the International Gargoyle Company, Cameron Duke, turns out he's not a good guy. He has been accused of tax fraud, embezzlement, murder. He has unpaid parking tickets. Money, yeah.
That's like a class 8 felony.
And the price of that stock drops to $1. And things are, in fact, the business closes. But just before it closes, Marley's able to sell her stock. 1,000 shares at $1. So how much does she make?
She loses $9,000.
She lost $9,000 plus interest.
Marley, don't you know?
Marley.
Buy low, sell.
Well, Caden knows that he has made several loans to people to buy stock in the International Gargoyle Company.
I have new kids. I don't know. I have no kids, but I do have dogs.
So he begins to make phone calls on January the 1st. One of those is to Marley Melton. Miss Melton, your loan is due now. Does Marley have $9,000? No. So she says, I'm going to default on my loan. And Caden says, well, I'll send the police to arrest you. Marley lives in a high-rise apartment. She opens the window and steps out. Rather than face financial ruin, she goes splat. And in October of 1929, that's what happened. People had bought stock. They had speculated. I'm going to buy it at this price, and the price is going to do what? Shoot up, then I can sell it. They over-speculated. Price didn't go up. The price went down. Maybe it went up, and then it came down. The price went down. And because they had borrowed money, they couldn't repay their loans. So what does that do to the bank? Caden now has a bunch of loans that are worthless. And now he's thinking about opening the window.
Now Caden is going to go out of business.
And the bank fails. Okay? And unlike today, there is no FDIC. And so Aniston, who has, $342.18 in the bank, doesn't have $342.18. It's gone. And so this happens time after time after time, and banks crash. Businesses fail. Banks close. People do commit suicide. I mean, I'm kind of making fun of that or making light of that, but people do. Particularly in New York City on Wall Street, they commit suicide. Yep. It does. And then finally, the fifth thing is laissez faire. And that has to do with Herbert Hoover. We're not going to touch the economy. The economy will take care of itself. And of course, it doesn't. And things get really bad. It's an understatement. So, see y'all. Thanks for playing today.